So this is episode 7 of Talking with the Presses, presented by Poetry London Online. I'm joining Mallory Tater, founder and publisher of Rahila's Ghost. Mallory, thank you for joining me.
Thank you for having me. I'm glad we're able to connect.
Ditto. So I wonder if you would say a few words about the impetus of the press, which released its first chapbooks in 2017. I understand the press bears the name of your great-great-grandmother. Would you offer a few words about that choice and what the title of the press means to you?
A great question. I would say my now husband and fellow writer, Curtis LeBlanc, and I were on a road trip to Saskatchewan, and I have Romanian ancestry where, and it was in the late 1800s that my ancestors came over from Romania and built farm and homesteads in the Regina area, a little more rural than Regina. And anyways, we were there during a terrible snowstorm, and our car went into the ditch. And it was during that time we had talked about our mutual passion for small press poetry, particularly the artfulness and the compatibility of, what's that word? To compress? Compactness of a chapbook. Anyhow, so we were in the ditch waiting for a tow truck to come on our way to the cemetery to go see my great-great-grandmother Rahila's grave. And when we got there, it turned out, and it was hinted at with some of my research, that perhaps she wasn't there. And anyhow, it coincided with a unique conversation about how badly we wanted to start a chapbook press once we graduated our MFAs. We graduated later 2016, and by 2017 we were up and running. So it was just a strange occurrence. And also Rahila was allegedly a writer and kept voracious journals, and she was my age when I started the press when she passed away. So it just it was one of those things that just gave you the chills, and it felt right.
Well, I mean, I might be abusing the ostensibly objective interviewer's position by saying that this is just an extraordinarily beautiful tribute to your great-grandmother's or great-great-grandmother's legacy, if you don't mind my saying so, starting up a chapbook press that produces such extraordinary work. Speaking of this sort of the kismet nature of its inception, I wonder if, although I'd intended to ask this question a little later, you'd say a word about how you approach editing. I know that one of the chapbooks that you've just released, this one by Rebecca Salazar, The Knife You Need to Justify the Wound, you edited, and I mean, it seems almost as if the coincident moment of your having finished an MFA at the same time that you went to visit this gravesite seemed almost as if you were discovering something that pre-existed you, or that you were following a path that was before you, something like this. I wonder if that bears at all on how you go about the process of finding what the poem ultimately wants to be as an editor.
Oh, that's a gorgeous question. Yes, and so I myself am not very expert at editing. I mean, when you do a BFA or an MFA and you're in workshop, you do get acquainted with the editing process. I find it quite daunting, and with poetry, you kind of want to let the poem sing for itself and not layer it with too much of your own insight and experience. But with Rebecca's book, it really spoke to me because it talks a lot about the misownership of the body, a young woman's body. And that's kind of what I was tackling in my own poetry at a similar time. And also talking about the idea of Catholicism and religion kind of creating this barrier between women and their bodies, and how that kind of authority can be quite dangerous. And anyways, the book just really, really spoke to me in that way. And I guess matrilineally sort of connected me to my own roots. And I really was, that book, when I read it the first time, really pried open for me questions about my own experience with my body and women's bodies in my family and that sort of thing. So although I was a little timid to edit it, just because it's not my strongest suit, I just felt really connected to the work and really wanted to, mostly helped with ordering the work, because Rebecca's a very polished poet, and the poems were already really harmonized and speaking really well to each other.
Lovely. So maybe moving from Rebecca to not only the other poets whose chapbooks you've just released, but also the poets whose chapbooks you've released over the past few years with Rahila's Ghost. I wonder if, and this might be an unfair question, but whether you could characterize the voice or voices of the poets that seem best to fit with Rahila's Ghost.
Mm-hmm. Our recent print run, I'll just say, is Mercy Tax by Rebecca Rustin, Plow Forward the Higgs Field, John Elizabeth Stincy. They're incredible. They had a poetry full-length collection and a novel come out during the pandemic as well. So lots of projects on the go for them. They're incredible. And local poet Karen Ellison, Pray for Us Girls. So those are our recent titles that I'm really, really proud of. What we look for at RG in a poet, it's work that is not too bogged down by institution and society's expectations of what a poem needs to be. That doesn't necessarily always mean form-wise it has to be experimental. I think a lot of our work is narrative, but it's raw and honest, and it's often by emerging voices who have a story to tell and haven't really been discouraged from finding their own voice. So I find they all sound distinct, unique, and it's pretty bold work. I find too a lot of it, while it can be lyrically lush, the narratives really speak at the forefront. And I guess that's what we were looking for the entire process. We always said we wanted to publish emerging and established, but there's something about poets who haven't been published before or who haven't had a full-length collection come out yet, where the work is just really unbridled and unboggled down by the expectations of what people think, literature has to be.
Yes, the high and unadorned rooms of literature, I should say. Which everyone drinks coffee from samovars and so forth.
Did that answer your question okay?
Yeah.
Okay.
So, I mean, if you're finishing an MFA in 2017, you're also, I suppose, at that point in your writing, when Rahila's Ghost was founded, finding that sort of unboggled down, as you say, voice. Does that, what am I trying to ask here? How would you characterize your voice as a poet? Is that a fair question? Maybe it's too on the nose.
What's really interesting, I dabble in poetry these days, but mostly I'm a reader of poetry right now, which is a really cool space to be in, because I was a little poemed out by the time I finished my MFA. My MFA thesis was This Will Be Good, which later got published by Book Hug Press into a book. And I had a lot of supportive eyes and warmth surrounding that process completely. It was just an honor to work with my editors and friends to really get that book to a place I was happy with. But at the same time, right now, I am super lucky that what I want to do with poetry is sit with it and read other people's. And I think that puts me in a really lovely position as a publisher who's always looking for new work and wanting to support emerging writers in my community and further than my community, because we have published a lot of Vancouver-based writers, but that's not solely what we do. And anyway, I'm really happy to just be moved back from my own work as a poet and just get to enjoy other narratives and other voices right now.
Were there things that you imported from your experience in the editorial capacity with Book Hug that you've imported into Rahila's Ghost?
I mean, I think as far as being really communicative and a good leader with your writers and making sure that they feel comfortable throughout the publishing process is really my role as publisher. Like I said earlier, I really only edited Rebecca Salazar's, but looking into our amazing staff of editors, I'll just name them here. It's Adele Barclay, Sean Robinson, Curtis LeBlanc, Shazia Hafiz-Ramji, Selena Bowen, and Dominic Bernier-Cormier. And so I really admire how they take on the editing process, which is to really respect the integrity of the work and the poet's intention, and to just get it into that polished, fierce space to make a really good impact on its readers. So I would say I've taken some good steps towards supporting editors and writers in that process. And I hope to, continue improving at that. We're still young.
Right. So you've discussed in the past the critical importance of the involvement of a visual artist to provide work for each chapbook's cover, and how that becomes a kind of dialogue between the poet and I suppose the editor perhaps as well, and the visual artist themselves. And I wonder if you'd say a few words about why the visual presentation of the book as object is so important to you, and whether there's a particular visual artist you're working with now whose work excites or inspires you.
I believe the first time when we published, we had, it was a friend of Adele who works with Penguin. Her name is Amy Frew, and she was our first designer, worked with us for a pretty modest honorarium, which was super thrilling on our part to have her work with us. And then when the books came out and you could hold them all together when we got our proofs, we were just like, this is exactly our vision. We would want one artist to do all three because it's aesthetically pleasing. And I think a big part of why people like chapbooks is, as I stumbled upon saying earlier, they're just so compact as little art objects, and the art really does matter. And so we wanted to put in the best quality for printing that we could. That's why we do matte covers and perfect bound, although that can be a little more expensive on the financials. We just really want them to be these beautiful, collectible narratives full of beautiful poetry for folks. So it's been really cool to work with different designers with different visions who work really close with the authors. And then every time the proofs come in the mail and I'm opening the package in my apartment here, I get so excited just to see how they're vaguely in conversation. And from then on, we just didn't want to do it any other way. So these were done for this print run by Kate Balfour. And she's a writer that works in publishing here in BC and wanted to start building her graphic design portfolio some more. So to be able to support her as well just was a great part of the process. And she did an excellent job with the books. I think what it is about, it's their starkness and their vibrancy that really speak to one another.
So one visual artist would be pre-selected for each year's 3 chapbooks. That's right?
We publish, well, we're a little delayed now. We were supposed to have a spring run, spring 2020, and then we usually do fall 2020, so 6 books a year. Okay. But just with COVID and all of the unknowns earlier on in March when we would have been ready to go, we delayed our next run to the fall. But we hope to get back on the horse with our 6 books a year in sets of 3 by 1 designer for 3 books.
I mean, the impact of COVID has obviously been something that's recurred throughout the course of these interviews with small press and literary magazine editors and publishers. And I wonder if you'd say a few words about the way in which you've been sort of forced, for lack of a better verb, to adapt, and whether you've gone forward with a sort of Zoom launches, or how are you going about the process of launching work? What's this experience for the past few months been particularly for you?
Wow. I mean, very strange. We're used to gathered more as a poetry community in Vancouver, so switching to different events online has been still pretty beautiful in its own way to see faces and to hear good work. Real Vancouver Writers Series just went online a few weeks ago and they did an excellent job with that event. But yeah, I would say we squeezed in Kara's launch here in Vancouver right before pretty much, well, maybe earlier in the new year. So I was really grateful for that in hindsight. But what we have done is an Instagram series on our social media. So using those tools for marketing a little bit more and promotions more than we have before, and asking our authors to generously read for a couple minutes on Instagram. And so that was received pretty widely and a pretty fun way to still share the work. We did recently decide to have a little summer sale just to keep books in circulation and keep ourselves afloat. And Massey Books here in Vancouver has also been carrying our titles. And so that's been, and Glass Bookshop as well in Edmonton. So we definitely appreciate our, brick and mortar stores who are delivering door to door during COVID, supporting us as well. So, I mean, as frustrating and different as it's been, people are resilient and people want to read and share art. So, I mean, I can't complain about that part. That part's been pretty beautiful.
Lovely. Someone in the audience has a chapbook manuscript, and it's a gold mine, and they send it to Rahila's Ghost after it's accepted. Not presuming that it's easier than it is. But what would the process be like on your end in terms of it going through editors, and then if a decision is made for it to be published, do you then bring in the visual artist? Like, what would the process be as soon as you receive a manuscript that is going to be published? What is the process like for you?
That's a good question, and it's one I get often because I think there is this like weird translucent veil over the actual publishing process. I found that too when I finished my MFA. I didn't even know how these things really work. So let's say I get a submission into our inbox. It's just our Gmail. We've got on our submissions page different requirements that we have. So, don't put it in WebDings size 72. Thank you. Anyway, let's say I read it and I see something there that's really stirring and interesting. I will then forward it to our editorial team, and then they'll get back to me on their thoughts about it. If we can meet in person, we have in the past, or electronically is fine too. And we'll decide if that really does make our list of a book we want in our roster that year. Then we would send out that author a warm congratulations and a contract explaining how the print run's going to go and that sort of thing. And usually, I think it's always been after that, when we have all 3 books for that one edition or season ready to go, we will contact a visual artist. We haven't yet taken submissions for art, but I wonder if that's something we'll do in the future.
And then do you just allow after a visual artist has been selected, you allow the poets and the visual artists, presumably they'd be back and forth in correspondence independently, or is there like an editorial oversight over that correspondence? Or
I think just to make sure everyone's comfortable with the process, because sometimes authors have pretty specific visions and it can be hard to let a designer know that, oh, that's not quite the color, or I have a phobia to lamps and there's a lamp on the front cover, that kind of thing. I will kind of be the middle person for that. So I usually go back and forth, or my husband, Curtis LeBlanc, who's here, he's the managing editor. He'll go back and forth as well. So yeah, we don't want to leave anyone to fend for themselves. I really am the advocate for both our designers and our authors to have a good experience. Lovely. And I'm very like nosy and curious anyhow, so.
So here's a kind of banal question, but what does your funding model look like? Do you depend upon grants, presumably subscriptions, chapbook sales, this sort of thing? Mm-hmm. If that's the answer to the question.
No, it's a good question. Unfortunately, my answer won't really like spark joy in people trying to start a chapbook press, but we are very boom and bust. It's always been that way. We unfortunately can't pay our editors at this point. We're still too new. They're gracious friends and volunteers. We pay our authors in copies of their book that they can then sell to family and friends, which isn't that dissimilar from Main Street. Yeah. Oh, yeah. Sorry, my husband's whispering to me that he says we also are paying them royalties now. That's true too. We did just start doing that because when we learned that we can pay in royalties, and then we'll be eligible to apply for Canada Council, because we were too young to apply for Canada Council. So this year we can, which would be really great to see. And we can actually pay our editors. Oh my gosh, pay ourselves? Is that too wild? But we do pay our designers an honorarium. So yeah, we're very sales dependent. We have had fundraisers in the past to get us off the ground. We had a community garden party hosted by Adele Barclay with live music and raffle prizes. And that was a really cool event to just kind of get us on our feet. But yeah, sometimes when I check the balance for our account, I'm either delighted or disappointed, which really depends on the day and the season.
And so I mean, obviously, you wouldn't be able to meet in a garden anytime soon necessarily for launch or something like this. But are there events upcoming of which you'd like the audience of this interview to be apprised?
I honestly have to say, as far as RG goes, we don't have any events on the horizon yet, but we do have 3 awesome chapbooks. I can name the authors. It's kind of, we haven't fully announced yet, but why not? Kai Conradi, Claire Kelly, and Tin Lorica will be publishing with us in the fall. So I look really forward to seeing what their books look like. The manuscripts are great from what I've seen so far. And yeah, what events we will have electronically or otherwise during that time, we'll have to see.
Very good. And with that, this has been episode 7 of Talking with the Presses presented by Poetry London Online with Mallory Tater, founder and publisher of Rahila's Ghost. Mallory, thank you for taking the time to speak this afternoon.
Thank you so much, Kevin. This was great.
Take care.
Thank you.